Hey everyone, this video is about Greek gods and titans and their archetypes. We're going to talk about 5 different titans and gods. Cronos, Prometheus, Demeter, Apollo, and Hermes are the 5 we will talk about. And the stories that that I am referencing come from a book called Gods, Heroes, and Men of Ancient Greece by a man named W.H.D. Rouse. But these are pretty familiar. I don't quote the text that often, so if you don't have a copy of that book because you're not in the class, that's fine. You really don't need one in order to have these fit. So what we're doing is we are identifying the archetype for each of these characters, and then I'm going to go through and go over the attributes of each of the archetypes. You can kind of see, my materials behind me there. I'm going to go through the attributes of each and show where the Titan or God demonstrates that attribute. Couple of things to consider. First of all, just because I say that a character fits an archetype and I make an argument for it does not mean that the character cannot or does not fit a different archetype, right? Like I always say, as long as you can support your inference and your assertion with evidence from the text, then it is a valid interpretation. So this is just my interpretation based on the evidence I have found and seen in this text about each of these characters. And the second thing is that remember that an attribute can be either a strength or a weakness. And what we want to find is evidence, especially from a strength and a weakness, in order to make a well-founded and solid argument as to why that character fits that archetype. But I'm going to go through all the characteristics so that if you're, stealing from me, which is totally fine, you can kind of pick and choose which ones you want to use as you make your compositions, or if you're using this for like a class discussion or something like that. So we're going to go ahead and start with Cronos. Cronos is the king of the Titans. Backstory on Cronos, he wanted to rule the universe, so he defeated his father and took over, and that made him a little paranoid going forward. I've identified him as the archetype of the ruler. The ruler has 6 attributes associated with that character. There's omnipotence, meaning they're all-powerful. They have status and resources. They're aloof, they're unlikable, and they're out of touch. So we'll go over each one of those and I'll show you, or I'll identify places in the story, in the text, where he demonstrates that. And we'll start with omnipotence. And right off the bat, page 4, he's the king of the Titans, right? He is the most powerful person in all the universe. So that, therefore, by definition, makes him omnipotent. If you want further evidence of this, the fact that he swallows 5 children and a stone disguised as a child and doesn't burst is a pretty sure sign of his omnipotence. It's also page 4. But further evidence, when Zeus and the other Olympians finally, when Zeus rescues his brothers and sisters and they fight against Cronos and ultimately defeat him, although he's defeated, it takes 6 Olympians, 3 Cyclopses, and 3 monsters to defeat him, plus a handful of Titans that betrayed Cronos and went with the gods. And that's on page 5. So it takes a lot of firepower in order to defeat Cronos, making him pretty darn powerful. Let's move on to status. Obviously, again, as king of the Titans, that's a rather, high level of status. If you look also on page 5, his imprisonment in Tartarus, he is given a lot of respect by the gods, by just how many safeguards they put in place to keep him in there. So he's guarded by the Cyclopses, There's also Cerberus, the three-headed dog. And also Atlas is there kind of blocking the way because Atlas has to hold the heavens up away from the earth. So it shows the level of respect that they give him, thus indicative of his status. In terms of resources, the third attribute, he has all the Titans at his disposal when the war begins on page 5. And he could get this, although he rejects, the assistance, he could get the Cyclopses and the monsters that end up helping the gods to help him. In fact, everybody that defects to the gods, he does have initially at his disposal, and he rejects. So although he rejects them, they're still his resources to begin with. Let's go to the weaknesses of the ruler, his aloofness. Well, he's aloof to the point that he doesn't notice that his wife gave him a stone wrapped in cloth instead of a baby to swallow. That's page 4. And also on page 4, when Zeus is being raised on the island, there's a couple of guards outside who, every time Zeus cries as a baby, they bang their spears on their shields. And somebody who is less aloof, who is more in tune and paying attention to things, would probably notice that there are these two random guards just hanging out, and they just, every now and then make a bunch of noise. Why would they have to do that? But Cronos doesn't care, so he's aloof. Unlikable. He's definitely unlikable, right? He swallows his children, which is not only unlikable to them and to his wife, who is sick of it, but, we as the reader are like, I don't know about this guy, right? He blows off Prometheus' advice. Prometheus, as we'll see in a little bit, is a creative, independent thinker who gives really good advice. And Cronos just blows him off. No, I don't need anybody's help. Why? Because also on page 5, he's afraid of his brothers. If he were not unlikable, he would have nothing to fear from his brothers, right? Him being out of touch, there's really nothing in the text that indicates that. It's kind of a byproduct of being aloof, and that you're out of touch, but it works better for being aloof. So that's Cronos. We're now going to move on to Prometheus. Prometheus, I said, fits the archetype of the creator. And the attributes of the creator, the strengths are creativity, willpower, and conviction. Weaknesses, self-involvement, single-mindedness, and lack of practical skills. All right, so let's go one by one there. So Prometheus, creativity. Wow, is he creative, right? Right off of the bat on page 7, he creates all the creatures, including mankind, right? And to further show his creativity, he doesn't just create another animal when he makes mankind. He takes different aspects of all the creatures he's created and put them into man to make him this unique, standalone creature in the world. So there are two ways he shows his creativity. Later on page 8, after he has negotiated peace between the gods and mankind, he's pretty creative in how he tricks Zeus into taking the worst part of the sacrifice. So that's a definite show of his creativity. It's outside of the box thinking. And he's also creative in how he gets the fire out of Olympus and down to mankind. His willpower. His willpower really has to do with focusing on mankind, right? So when he tricks Zeus and gets the best parts for man, he's showing his willpower. He wants everything for mankind, so he does this. Also, when he gets the fire, he forces his will. He's told no by Zeus, and he's like, no, I'm going to do it. Which also leads into his conviction in that he has to trick Zeus and that he has to sneak the fire out of Olympus, in order to bring that down to mankind. The final piece of evidence of his conviction, and I'm sorry if I kind of bled those two together, but the final evidence of his conviction and his dedication to mankind is that he notices that man is sad. right? Because they can see the future and they know, oh, it doesn't matter, we're all going to die anyway, and life is misery. Well, Zeus doesn't want human beings to suffer and be upset, so he takes all of those miseries away, and that's on page 9. Let's move over to the negative aspect, or the weaknesses. In terms of being self-involved, there's really nothing that he shows. None of what he does is for his own glory, which pushes us to his single-mindedness in that all of these things he does is strictly for man, right? So the desire to get fire, the desire to get the best part of the sacrifice. He negotiates with Zeus to not wipe out mankind, right? All of this he does for the good of mankind. So most of the things I listed as evidence of, you know, the strengths of the character also fit for him as a weakness, because he does it all for man, and he therefore defies Zeus and is ultimately punished for being so single-minded, for not thinking of like the greater good. You know, from our point of view, it's not the greater good. We want good things, but lack of skill is an interesting one. You wouldn't think of a titan or a god as lacking any skill, especially one so creative. But in terms of lacking a practical skill, when he takes all the miseries away from mankind, instead of like destroying them or burying them in the center of the earth or blasting them off into the universe or something like that, he puts them in a jar. And sure, he seals the jar with wax, but it's still a jar. So I'm not sure how much forethought he had, right? He's kind of so in his own head and just thinking of mankind. He's like, I'm just going to get these away, I'll put them in this jar, and nobody will touch it, right? He also shows a lack of practical skill in that he entrusts his dumb brother in order to take care of this jar, right? He has to go out and do this mission, so he has to entrust the jar to Prometheus, knowing that his brother is a moron, but does it anyway. So the practicality of Prometheus is in question based on the choices he makes regarding, you know, the miseries of mankind, right? All right, so that's Prometheus. Let's move on to Demeter. Now we're getting into the gods. Titans go away, gods come in. Demeter, I said, is the caregiver. Attributes of the caregiver. The caregiver has honor, selflessness, and loyalty. A caregiver also lacks personal ambition and lacks personal leadership, desire, or capability. So let's go through Demeter in terms of these attributes. Honor. All sorts of honor, right? First of all, on page 12, she's one of the 6 original gods, right? That's a pretty high place of honor. There is already a Mother Earth, and she takes over as Mother Earth and being known as Mother Earth on page 12, so that's a pretty high place of honor. On 13, after after Persephone is kidnapped, both Hecate and Helios, so god of the moon, or goddess of the moon and god of the sun, help her in her search for Persephone, so they therefore show that they honor her. They could say nothing because it's Zeus and Hades who created this plot, and they could get in trouble for betraying that. On page 15, after she has revealed herself as a goddess to the people of the town, they go ahead and build that temple for her, right? She says, build one, and they're like, yes, ma'am, we will do that. So she is an honorable figure. And then later on, after Zeus in order to appease her, bestows all honor upon her, this is page 17, in order to just make sure that she'll go along with the arrangement that he's about to set up regarding her daughter in Hades. Her selflessness, so thinking of others, and this happens a lot as well, right? 13, after her daughter goes missing, she searches for 9 days and nights for her. Doesn't do anything else. Is just focused on Persephone. Where is she? I can't find her anywhere. Searches the whole world, right? When she takes the name, when she's disguised as the old crone, the name Doso means the giver, right? And so people who give are seen as selfless. She accepts the nursemaid's job. She doesn't have to. She's a goddess, right? And she definitely doesn't have to do this, but she does. She's selfless. She's now focusing her attention on a different child and still giving of herself, even though she's upset. And when she does that on 14, she also tries to make Demephon, the child, immortal. She doesn't have to do that either. So she's so selfish. She just gives and gives and gives, right, to whatever child is in her care. And finally, on page 17, when she's reunited with Persephone, and Persephone says how she was tricked by Hades, and how she kind of foolishly was picking a flower and got kidnapped by Hades, Demeter has every right in the world to be angry at Persephone for being a fool. She doesn't. She comforts Persephone, and they comfort each other. So that selflessness, again, she doesn't make, the fact that she's not going to be able to be with Persephone forever about her. She makes it about Persephone. You poor child, let me comfort you for what happened to you. Loyalty. She demonstrates her loyalty throughout to both Persephone and Demephon. The small child, you can go back to all the selflessness that I pointed out, and that's also evidence of her loyalty. Loyalty to the point that she almost wipes out the human race, right? She's so loyal to her daughter that she won't allow anything to grow. And to Demephon as well, she's so loyal to him that, she still bestows that he will be honored among men and gods, even though she didn't get to complete the ceremony and make him immortal. So let's go to the weaknesses. Her lack of ambition or leadership. Well, initially she doesn't do more for Persephone, right? When Helios tells her what happened, she just shuts down and leaves, right? She's a goddess. She's one of the 6 original goddesses, right? So she has as much power as Zeus or Hera or any of the other original 6, but she doesn't take advantage of that. She doesn't demonstrate that ambition and that leadership to go and demand, no, you did this to me, you bring me my daughter back, or I'm going to, bring down fire and brimstone on these humans that you love so much. When she goes to the town, she disguises herself as an old crone. She doesn't have to do that. She could pick any disguise she wants. She could be beautiful, she could be rich, she could be influential, she could just be a goddess. She doesn't. So that lack of ambition, the want for more, is demonstrated in her choosing that disguise. And then finally, she kind of gives in to Zeus, right? She doesn't get what she wants. She wants her daughter back all the time, but she has to acquiesce to Zeus. And Zeus does his best to accommodate her by saying, okay, a third of the year, Persephone has to be in Hades, in Tartarus with Hades. But the rest of the time she's with you. And Demeter could hold out for more, but she doesn't. So it shows a lack of ambition. Apollo. Apollo, like Prometheus, fits the archetype of the creator. And again, those attributes are creativity, willpower, and conviction. Creators are also self-involved, single-minded, and have a lack of practical skills. So let's go through Apollo. His creativity declares on page 21, I shall ever love music, right? So what artist, what creator doesn't declare their love for what they create, right? So there's some direct evidence, right? We don't have to make an inference there. There's direct evidence of his creativity. Even though it's kind of weird on page 22, him sailing across the seas on a winged tripod is pretty creative. It's weird. Why would he have to do that? But you gotta say it's unique and creative. Page 24, he builds his own temple. Other gods and goddesses have temples built for them. He builds his own. And then how he stocks his temple with the Cretan sailors on pages 24 and 25. It's a little underhanded and sneaky, and we'll talk about that later, but it's pretty creative, right? Oh, let's change the winds and I'll pretend to be a dolphin and lead them here, and then I'll pretend to be just a really good looking dude and be like, hey, come here, let's go in. It's a creative plan to get those Cretan sailors and later the priestesses to join him at his temple at Delphi. Willpower. He has the willpower, and willpower and conviction kind of go together. He's so focused on getting this temple, right, establishing himself as an equal amongst the gods, because he's not one of the original six, he's one of the next six. So his entire search for an area for his temple on pages 22 to 24 demonstrate his willpower and conviction. And then again, how he gets those sailors there. It's quite a scheme to get them there. It takes a lot of will. He could kidnap it. There's any number of things he could do, but he wants it to appear like it's some free will choice for them, but it's really not, and he's asserting his will on them. Let's go to the weaknesses. Self-involved. Apollo is very self-involved, right? So, when he first finds the site near Telphusa, the pond or spring that she lives in, he just says, I'm gonna build here, not paying any mind to her. And it takes quite a bit for her to convince him not to build there. He finally finds the perfect place again near Delphi, and there's a dragon there, and instead of letting the dragon live out its life, it's not hurting anything, he decides to kill the dragon, and ultimately, page 25, this temple is all about him. He is building a temple to him so people can come and worship him, right? So I'm going to pause for a second. And we're back, and I now have a sticker on my hand. Because my daughter says I have to keep it there. Okay, so where was I? His self-involvement, right? So all of this entire thing, his creativity, willpower, and conviction is all about him building this temple for himself, right? Tricks his poor sailors, almost displaces this poor, water nymph. All of it, kills a poor dragon. What did that dragon do to him, right? All for him. His single-mindedness, he's just focused on that temple. It's the same thing. All of this stuff is also evidence of him being single-minded as well as self-involved. Lack of practical skill. And this one you got to stretch a little bit. I'm gonna take my stick. No, I'll leave it up. This you have to stretch a little bit in order to see the connection. But he has to trick the sailors in order to get them to become priests at his temple. So maybe he lacks a little bit of personal charm or the ability to, make friends or convince people. And although being able to interpret the future is not a practical skill in terms of human beings, it probably would be in terms of gods. So the fact that he has to learn how to see the future and the art of divining, he has to learn that from the god Pan, kind of shows a little bit of a lack of practical skills. That's page 25 for those of you following along, by the way. All right, let's get to our last god, Hermes. Hermes was a tough one because, in the text that we read, it says that he is a trickster, right? And so instantly we need to think that, then he fits the archetype of the jester. I'm going to argue that he actually fits the archetype of the outlaw better. And this one's a little tougher because he doesn't really, all of his strengths don't really become evident until after he has made the change. So when he turns good, he renounces his selfish ways, all of a sudden all of these strengths are seen as positive, whereas they may be strengths that we would assign a negative connotation to. Anyway, so the outlaw positive strengths, independent thinking, virtuous, and they owe no favors, mean they don't need people to help them, right? They can do it on their own. They're rugged and maverick, blah, blah, blah type of things. In terms of weaknesses, they're self-involved and potentially criminal. So let's go through this. Independent thinking. He creates the harp out of a tortoise and the loins of a rabbit or something like that. It's pretty independent thinking, right? To see a tortoise and be like, that would make a good guitar, is pretty independent thinking. And the fact that he can make it, remember, he does this all like the day he's born. So he makes the harp on page 28. On page 29, his independent thinking, he goes ahead and steals the cattle, Apollo's cattle, and creates fire, right? It learns how to make it out of sticks, so you don't need, the hearth from the heavens in order to make it. So he's thinking independently. Nobody shows him how to do these things. He sees a problem, he solves it, right? I'm bored, let's make a harp. I'm hungry, let's get some cows. I need to cook these cows, let's make a fire. Some direct evidence of his independent thinking, and on 30, when he's talking to his mother, he says, I will be Apollo's equal, right? So that's a pretty bold statement, right? And so he is stating that he doesn't need anyone's help in order to earn his place amongst the gods. So that demonstrates his independent thinking. Virtue. Okay. This one, you've got to kind of bite your tongue when I say some of these and see it, in hindsight that these are virtues. But he does give back the cattle on page 32. He does give Apollo his harp on pages 33 and 34 and teaches him how to play. So, even though he's virtuous in that, okay, I'm caught, here's my stuff. And yes, it takes, 4, 5, 6 pages of basically catching him in his lies for him to finally admit, fine, right? But when we think of the outlaw character, they're kind of a rascal and a rogue anyway, so they're going to try to lie their way out of things, but ultimately they're going to do the right thing. Think Han Solo, right, in episode 4, right? He says, I got my money, I'm getting out of here, right? Seems selfish. We're like, oh, what a jerk. And then at the end, when it's just Luke and Darth Vader, who comes in, yeah, and knocks Darth Vader off of Luke's backside so that Luke can womp rat shoot the Death Star, right? So ultimately, even though throughout it seems like they're kind of jerks and only interested in themselves, ultimately they do the right thing. Hermes does the same thing. Ultimately, he gives back the cattle. He gives Apollo the harp and teaches him to play. And so much so that he is named the guardian of herdsmen. So that's a pretty virtuous position, right? And also on 34, he then promises never to steal anything from Apollo or anyone else ever again, thus declaring his virtue. And everybody is so convinced that he's made messenger of the gods. He and I forget the lady who is messenger of the god as well. Iris, I think. Yeah, Iris. So all examples of his virtue. Owes no favors. He's a baby. He decides to go feed himself. Right, 28 and 29. When he is spotted by the grape farmer, the Demeter, he's preemptive with that. He doesn't wait for the Demeter to say, hey, I could tell it looks like you're stealing those cattle, and it'd be really easy for me to tell whoever comes by looking for their cattle. He's preemptive, and so that gets him out of owing the Demeter anything. He makes a promise as long as the Demeter keeps quiet, so he's ahead of it, if that makes sense. And he earns all of his rewards on pages 34 and 35. So everything that Zeus and Apollo and other gods give him, he earns, right? They're not just, oh, you poor child, let me give you this. He earns all that. He demonstrates his virtue and worthiness. He earns his place amongst the gods. So he doesn't owe any favors. Zeus can't come to him and be like, hey, remember, I made you a god. You owe me a favor. That's not going to happen to Hermes. All right, self-involved. Ooh, is he self-involved? Everything he does up to his conversion, right, is about being self-involved, stealing the cattle. He kills that poor tortoise. What did that tortoise ever do? He was crawling along. He's like, I want a guitar. I want a harp. I'm going to gut you, crack out your insides, and turn you into a harp, right? And he lies the entire time he's with Apollo and Zeus until he's finally caught. He lies and lies and lies. So he's really self-involved. This is all about him. And potentially criminal, he's not potentially criminal, he is a criminal. He stole, he stole Apollo's cattle, right? And he lies to Apollo and Zeus. He lies to the judge that he did this, right? And does everything he can, but he's got that tell where he looks everywhere and doesn't look people in the eye, right? That's the moral. Look people in the eye if you're lying so that they don't think you're lying. Unless looking them in the eye makes you more guilty. You know, everything's double-edged sword. One more piece of evidence of him being potential criminal is that Apollo gives him that golden wand, and on it he puts the caveat that as long as Hermes does good works, this magic wand will benefit him, right? So he's kind of, you know, he's got this, Apollo still thinks he's still got some outlaw in him. He could potentially do something bad, right? He could do something criminal. As long as you're good, this wand is going to work in your favor. The second you do something bad, well, you know, then it's not going to work anymore. The batteries are going to run dead. All right, that was a lot of stuff. Thanks for following along. We'll have more videos about the heroes, right? We'll talk about Heracles, we'll talk about Theseus, we'll talk about Jason and the Argonauts, and we'll talk about Orpheus in later videos. Bye!